Hello, I'm Paul Schranz, Director of Business Development and Client Success for VendorCentric, a national consultancy that specializes in all three pillars of vendor management: procurement, third-party risk, and contract management. We provide advisory services and managed solutions that enable organizations to take a systematic, risk-based approach to creating more value and less risk with their vendors. Welcome to our Expert Insights interview. This is a series of interviews where we take a few minutes to talk with leading experts to share their insights about important topics of interest. In today's discussion, I'm fortunate to talk with my colleague Brett Whiteman, VP of Strategic Alliances and Corporate Business Development for Prevalent, a leader in the 2020 Gartner IT Vendor Risk Management Magic Quadrant. We recently partnered with Prevalent to help our mutual clients effectively manage and mitigate the security and compliance exposures that come from working with vendors, suppliers, and other third parties. In our discussion today, we'll be talking about the best practices and benefits of utilizing a technology platform to optimize risk and compliance management with your third parties. Welcome, Brett. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining me today for this Expert Insight interview and sharing your firsthand perspective about how a global technology company efficiently, effectively works to improve risk management and compliance with companies working with third parties. Before we get started, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Prevalent and the work you do.
Yeah, and thanks, Paul. Appreciate you having me on this month. And as you mentioned earlier, I run alliances and corporate business development for Prevalent. Prevalent and our partners are focused on delivering a simplified approach to third-party risk management, creating efficiencies across really the overall third-party lifecycle, not just the third-party risk management lifecycle. And we do this work by leveraging partners like VendorCentric to provide services and technology to develop and optimize third-party risk management programs.
That's great. That's excellent. Well, I know that the work you and your team does is very impressive. We're excited to work with you and very interested to hear some of your comments today as we're trying to help people think through technology and the best way to utilize it in their programs. So for those that are listening that either are working in a manual environment or maybe they have a system that's three or years older, can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the technology advancements or functional advancements that have come into the systems in the last couple of years?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and definitely from a technology perspective, there's a few things that organizations need to be looking for, and really it needs to fit back into the overall third-party risk management program and how they're managing the overall vendor ecosystem as well as overall risk management. But some of the things specific to third-party risk management that we really see from a technology perspective here over the last couple of years that have really developed is really how does the technology help me centralize and plug into where I can find and understand who my third parties are. This is absolutely critical because getting an understanding of what that ecosystem looks like, who's within your third parties that you're working with, that you're leveraging, how are you tiering and profiling those third parties? We view that as absolutely critical, and from a technology perspective, and having a good understanding of what does that look like from an overall third party perspective in terms of who you're working with. Really, the second thing I'd be looking for and would suggest people looking for, and this again goes back into that really kind of broader program that you might have or looking to develop is really how does this technology help with my workflows? Technology is really here to help automate processes and help automate workflows. And how does a piece of technology help me automate the workflows? Is it the right technology to automate the workflows throughout this life cycle? And that will allow you to really focus on different parts of the process, different parts of the life cycle that might be more important as long as you really work on that workflow and make sure you have that within the technology. And then really the last piece is around reporting. This is an area that's really seen a lot of advancement over the last few years or so that I've seen across the board within technology as a third-party risk management. But really there's a need out there of reporting on what risk do we have? How does this risk affect us? And how do we effectively communicate that through the organization, from teams that are running third party risk and responsible for reporting on it, all the way and managing it, all the way up to executives and board levels, of making sure that they have the right understanding of what this risk looks like, and what risk vendors and third parties might present to them from an organizational perspective. As part of this too is I'd be looking at a technology, and some of the things that you see out there today is how do technologies help me map back to compliance initiatives, governance
Yeah.
initiatives, frameworks that are out there similar to NIST, ISO, GDPR, and others. So those are really the three things that I'd be looking for. But at the end of the day, it really does come back into really how you set up the foundation of your program, and making sure that the technology really helps automate what the program and the process you already have set up.
Yeah, that's great. I'm kind of a very simplistic guy in some ways, and one of the things I think about is I always say make sure the system is working for you and you're not working for the system. Because over the years
Yeah.
I've been involved in a lot of different sales systems that I end up spending more time updating data in the system and managing the workflow for the system versus the system really streamlining my work. So those comments are really, I think, very important and very timely. As you look ahead, what are you and your colleagues at Prevalent? What kind of trends are you seeing in third-party risk management, this year, and what you might be, hearing about things that are emerging going into the next, 12 or 24 months?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, we see quite a few trends, but there's two that have been sticking out, at least from my perspective, that are really common in terms of conversations with other industry experts, with other organizations within third-party risk management. And the first one is taking a look at moving beyond cyber risk. Traditionally, third-party risk management has been very focused on really cyber risk of organizations and third parties that they're working with. And what we've seen over the last, I would even say about 15 months or so, is that there's been a need and a desire for organizations to get smarter beyond just cyber risk. So this is pushing us into areas of having an understanding of risk around business, financial, reputational, around vendors, and kind of leading us into more of a focus around environmental, social, and governance, ESG
Mm.
for sure, of vendors, and really driving that conversation. What we're also seeing as part of this, and kind of a bigger trend that we're seeing here as we move beyond cyber, is more collaboration internally with organizations across procurement, privacy, security, and compliance, to really make programs better. Because again, the overall vendor and third party lifecycle is much broader than just third party risk management, much
Yeah.
broader than cyber. And so that's something that we're starting to see, is better collaboration, and really drive to work across those different parts of the organization. I would say the second thing that we're seeing, and that's been pretty prominent here recently, is actually more on the cyber side of the things, and it's really how do organizations address the knowledge and understanding of how does a breach affect my third party, and how does that affect my risk. So when something like a SolarWinds or other type of breach comes out, how does that affect the critical third parties that I'm working with? And how do I get information on who's leveraging that technology, and what kind of risk might that expose me to?
Yeah.
So a lot of questions, a lot of areas there. And that's really where having a rapid response approach to those areas, having notification of around breaches, trying to get out in front of it as much as possible. That's really where we see a lot of organizations kind of focusing from a third party risk management perspective.
That's great. I mean, those are really important things, and I think that cross organizational collaboration is really critical because there's a lot of silos out there, and risk does not exist in silos. So you're absolutely right on there.
Yeah.
Just one more question as you talk about this. Excuse me. Be curious what your thoughts are. Maybe some best practices that people either again with existing systems, or if people are implementing new systems, maybe a couple best practices that you think would be important to think about as they're doing that work.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it really comes down to, like you mentioned, keeping it simple. And it starts with having a strong foundation at an overall program level for third party risk management. Like I mentioned earlier, technology is helpful when it comes to automation, but it really needs to plug into a broader program for it to really be truly beneficial to leverage the technology and to have a good foundation and understand whether you're starting out or you're looking to mature your program, where do you want to be in 12, 24, 36 months from now with your third party risk management program? And some of the things that I've experienced and what I would suggest, and if you're just starting out with a program, or if you're taking a look at how do you make your program better, really five things that I would take a look at and questions I would ask myself is who are the key internal stakeholders? Who needs to be a part of this process? IT security, does it need to be procurement, legal, privacy? But get an understanding of who needs to be part of this process and who's working with our third parties, and get them involved quickly and help them understand the importance of this. Next is how do we define critical vendors? We've got a lot of vendors and a lot of different organizations, and how do we really understand and who is critical to us, both from a cyber perspective, but also a supply chain perspective, and how does it affect our business? The next one would be what information do I need on our vendors? It's going to be different based on criticality. It's going to be different based on relationship. And so getting an understanding of how what information do we need to be collecting and looking at and analyzing. And then talked about it a little bit earlier in terms of what I'd be looking for in terms of technology, but it really comes down to how do we need to report on this risk? Are we doing this program because of compliance initiatives, governance initiatives, best practices? Based on that, how do we need to report on that, both internally and externally, from that perspective? And then the last piece, and these kind of the last two can be interchangeable. I typically go to reporting first, but this could easily be the next one. But I would recommend having a good plan and best practices around remediation. It's good to understand the risk, and I think we as an industry have done a good job of collecting that risk and understanding data points. But how do you actually go remediate that? And that's really critical and key in terms of developing an overall program. So once you have that strong foundation, again, I think it's a lot easier to take a look at technology, really leverage that technology in terms of how you automate that process, and really at the end of the day, how do we become more efficient and spend our time in the right areas? And really comes back to have a good foundation, leverage technology to automate so that you can be focused on the right areas.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate this. Has been an interesting discussion. Great insights you shared. I'm sure our listeners will walk away with some great, important information. So thank you so much, Brett. It was great to talk with you, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah, appreciate it, Paul. Thanks, everyone.